Welcome to She Brigade, the podcast. I'm your host, Pelontle Mosimege. On this podcast, we bring you amazing trailblazing women to come and share their life and career journeys with you. From entrepreneurs to 9-to-5ers, join us as each guest takes you through all of the highs and all of the lows of their journeys that have led them to being who they are today. Hi, Lebohang, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Pelo. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm so happy to do this. I'm so happy that we get to do this, and I'm glad that we get to do it face-to-face as well.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me
Okay.
too.
So on this podcast, we like to start all the way from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So take us all the way back to what it was like for you growing up as a child, primary school, high school, all of it.
Okay. I was born in Stockholm in Sweden in the 90s because my parents were exiled freedom fighters. They were part of Umkhonto weSizwe. So that's where I had my very first beginnings. And then when South Africa moved into a democracy, which is so significant today, then we came back home.
Just by the way, on that, we're literally recording on Freedom Day.
Yes.
'Cause I know this will air in a few weeks, but we're literally recording on Freedom Day. Yeah.
So then my parents came back to the country. We lived in Pretoria for a while. I went to various Afrikaans primary schools, and then my parents were employed in government, so there was like this very cool place where all the kids who worked at the specific place, whose parents worked at the specific place, we all went to nursery school there. And then when I went to primary school, that was at a place called Springvale Primary in Verda Park. That was great as well. I loved it because I was like an achiever, and it was quite interesting because it was like full of white children, but also full of all children, but mostly white children. And somehow the white children had their parents had historical relationships with the teachers. So it was so interesting, this feeling of invisibility where where I come from, I'm very special. But when I get to school, I wasn't really that special, And it was just an interesting space to be in. But I worked really hard. I achieved a lot. And that made me happy. Achieving made me really happy. It made my mom really happy, so it made me happier. And then I went to high school. I went to the National School of the Arts, which is in Braamfontein, and I majored in dance, but we had all the subjects, really. So I was a dancer, and I was doing good at academics as well. And I think the most special thing about going to the National School of the Arts, I think it's one of those experiences that have really shaped who I am, because all of us there knew we were special. We knew we were going to be stars, we had no idea how. Well, at the time, we thought we were going to be dancers or musicians or artists or actors, but we just knew that we were going to have a very incredible life path. And some of the people that I went to school with are really incredible people in the industry. And whenever I see how well they're doing, it just really affirms that was a very special place to have gone to high school. So I really love that part of the journey. And when I was coming to the end of my high school career and I had to figure out which varsity to go to, I suddenly decided that I wanted to go to Lysoff. I wanted to study fashion, and I think that was an influence of watching The Devil Wears Prada.
Oh my gosh, that's my favorite movie.
I love it, right? And I was like, and what that exposed me to is that, you don't just have to be a designer, but you could really be in the business of fashion, and you could be a writer as well within that industry. And it's just something I became so incredibly passionate about, and I applied to Lysoff and they accepted me. And that was going to be my next path until my mom, the year that I was meant to go to Lysoff, which was 2009, my mom was like, you cannot go through with this. Please go to a proper university only because you're so smart, And she stroked my ego. And she said, you're just so smart. It would be such a waste if you go and study fashion.
Gosh.
And I was like, okay, fine, Mom. But I really had no aspirations of being in a normal job. I couldn't figure out what on earth I would have done, but I said, okay, Mom, that's fine, because also I love my mom and her advice has never let me down. So I said, okay. So I applied to Wits, and I applied for a BA, And when I got there, I did she said she wanted me to do international relations because she wanted to be a diplomat. I didn't want to be a diplomat, but I signed up to do international relations anyway, and politics and sociology. And the one thing I didn't know what it was, anthropology. But the lady she was so friendly and her smile was so warm, and I was like, ooh, I want her to be my lecturer. Turns out that was Dr. Kelly Gillespie, who became one of my biggest support systems in university. So I go along and I'm studying, and it's really hard because you've got like 4 different disciplines, and each of them are pulling you in a different direction in terms of the kinds of theories that come up and what you must do in your mind to understand these theories, and how you must write and how you must be able to deliver on what you're being asked in an essay, for instance. So it was just difficult, but I loved reading and I loved writing, so it nurtured all of those, thank goodness. And then what happened? I went along and I got my degree, and then I was like, right, time for me to go get a job. So I luckily managed to get a job at Viacom Africa. So I was doing the social media for like Comedy Central and MTV Base and so on. And that was such an interesting experience, because after my first day of work, my first day of working in an office, I came home and I cried because I just couldn't fathom what I had just done to myself for the past 8 hours. It was an experience that I'm incredibly grateful for. But what had happened in that day is that I had woken up early and I had gotten to work, and from a certain time to a certain time, I had to use all of the power of my brain to be switched on and to be doing this work constantly, go, right?
Go, yes.
And as I'm busy trying to do this, my manager comes and is like, okay, and this, and then there's an email, and this, and my head was constantly spinning. And then I had 1 hour off to eat, and then I had to jump back into it again. And I didn't like that, like in the end, it was a really amazing space to work in, because it really isn't like a normal corporate office at all.
Yeah.
So I could dress how I wanted. So many people had tattoos. That's when I started getting tattoos as well. And it was just like a fun space. It was so amazing. But I couldn't fathom, like, is this going to be the rest of my life? I was like, I can't. So I was like, okay, I'm going back to school. So I went and I did my honors. And I've been in the school system since, actually. I never left. I was just like, I'm just going to stay here. I'm not going anywhere. So I did my honors, did my master's, and I'm currently doing my PhD now. So yeah, that is my journey. But one thing I must say as well is that there's been a lot of reading and writing, like ever since I was young, and ever since I discovered the library in primary school, because I didn't know what a library was before then. I just had books of my own.
Yeah.
And then they gave us a tour of the library, and they said, well, you're allowed to come and choose 1 book a week. And I was like, wow, so I get to have access to all of these books.
Like I can have any book I want.
Yeah. It was amazing. So the library became like one of my favorite spaces in school, and I became really good. I don't want to say friends with the librarian because I was scared of her, but she adored me, and she let me take out more books than other people in my grade. So it was just a fantastic journey of like stories and stories and stories.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wow, what a journey. I have so many questions. What a journey. Okay, so firstly, I want to just go back a little bit. Mm-hmm. Why dance? Why were you said you majored in dance when you were at the National School of the Arts. Why dance?
Why dance? So when I was in primary school, I did dance there. And I think from when I was young, I just always wanted to be special, okay? And I enjoyed feeling special because my mom put a lot of effort into making me feel special. So when I went to school, it's interesting, the school that I was in, when I tell you that the parents had historical relationships with the teachers, there's a way of creating almost like a clique, where certain children in the school or certain children in your class or in your grade, because their parents are so close with the teachers, it just feels like they're getting special treatment. You know what I mean? Yeah. And like, no matter how hard you work, you're not seen and you're not affirmed as much, right? And that I couldn't figure that out. And so when there was this dance teacher, and I was always really thin, so we started dancing, and I just had a natural flair for it. Like, I was just really good at it, and she paid a lot of attention to me, right? And so I think that's what you're looking for as a child.
Yeah.
You just want someone to affirm you, and to guide you. And so if maybe maths is not your strong point and English is, you just want someone to help you hone those skills, really. And so with the English and history and dance especially, those teachers were particularly attentive to me. And so I was able to flourish. I was able to work hard. I was able to be disciplined. And so when it came to, and this is coming from someone who in grade 1, Belo, it was the Christmas concert. We're in grade 1. Nobody knows us. But somehow I get cast to play the Christmas tree. Do you know what it means to play a Christmas tree in a concert for 3 hours? You sit there for 3 hours.
I was like, maybe there's a plot twist somewhere. I'm like, no, maybe you're gonna say maybe the tree had to sparkle and I don't know, dance around.
No, you sit there and the only thing you're allowed to do is move your head and sing. That's it. Other people have entrances and exits.
Yes.
And other people have got costume changes. And so I remember being 7 years old and just feeling like, what an injustice. Like, I can do more than this. I can sing, I can dance.
And you want to do more.
And you want to do more. But somehow I sat there as a Christmas tree. And that, I suppose that injustice never escaped me, because by the time I left primary school, I was the lead in all of the concerts and all the dances. And I was the valedictorian who was doing the special dance at valediction, you know. And thank God for that. But I don't know. I just feel like, you know, children are special and they should all be treated as though they are special. And being in a situation where, I suppose because of the historical legacies of apartheid and being in a former Model C school and, you know, having parents who probably went to that school and whose elder children went into that school before some of us were even born, there are particular stratifications that happen there. You can see favoritism and biases and all kinds of things. But yeah, I think that's how I got into dance, really. It was just Miss Kruger who saw me and nurtured me and, you know, gave me all of the incredible lessons. So then when it was time to go to high school, I knew I didn't want to go to the high school that everyone else was going to, because that high school had a very big sporting culture. And when it was the open day, they were explaining and quite proudly telling us that, you know, there's a tennis court and a basketball court and a netball court and a rugby field and a soccer field. And I was just like, this is not going to work for me. No. This is not going to work for me, because what I also had discovered being at school is that I don't run well and I don't run fast, and other people run faster than me. And it breaks my heart that if I'm losing at this thing, you know. I think I've always been competitive as well. But I want to be competitive in the things I'm good at, you know, I mean, as a human being. So I was just like, I am not going to that high school because they are going to force me to play sport and I'm going to lose, and it's not going to be good for who I am as a person. So what can I do? And then my one uncle, he's young though, he was in NSA. His name is Mpumi Dlamini. He's a jazz musician. And so his parents were telling my mom all about it. And she was like, okay, you know, she should go. So Miss Kruger helped me prepare my audition. And I got in. And, you know, just like my mom had always wanted, because my mom always wanted to be a ballerina herself. So she was like partial to this idea of me being a classic dancer. So that's how I got into dance.
Oh, wow. Okay. I was just curious because, I mean, you're not a dancer now. So I was just curious to know like where the dance element came. Yeah, okay. And so before, like you mentioned, The Devil Wears Prada had kind of that right influence on you. What did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
Interestingly, I wanted to be a firewoman, a firefighter for a long time, because it just looked really, really cool, right? And they had the sliding pole in the station, and I'm like, oh, that is my favorite thing. This is a job for me. So for the longest time, I wanted to do that. And then throughout high school, because I was dedicating so much of my life to dance, I just figured that, okay, I'm going to be a dancer, even though, to be honest, studying dance made me hate it, because then you've got the ballet master who, I'm quite thin, but I've got the ballet master who was busy telling me how big my bum was, and I realized my bum wasn't big at all. And you've got, people who've got all kinds of eating disorders and problems because you are, as a young Black girl, entering into a space that was not necessarily designed for your body type, yes, right? Even though you can master it and become great. We have Kitty Petla, who's incredible. You can master it, but like just those kinds of feelings you have about your body because you aren't able to discipline it enough to fit into this particular mold as ballet would have liked. So yeah, what did I want to become? When I realized that I wasn't going to become a dancer and I thought I was going to become a writer or journalist, and then my mom made me go to Wits. By then I didn't know, actually.
You were just going.
I was just like, I'm just going to go with it. And what I do know is at the end of this, I would have figured it out. So when I got my degree, hadn't figured it out, went to work at an office that I knew would be a very fun and interesting experience and wouldn't necessarily be a traditional kind of corporate setting. And that also didn't feel like what I needed to do. I just said, you know what? I do really well at anthropology. And I guess I could become like the people around me who are anthropologists. My lecturers are anthropologists. They write books. I guess I could do that. So let me go back into the school system until I figure it out. And so school was really supposed to be a place of figuring it out. But the more that you spend time, especially as a postgraduate student, the more you spend time with your studies, the more you kind of have a sense of how you can grow within it and what you can do and what your own contribution can be. And so that's when I realized that actually anthropology is a discipline that's rooted in racism and imperialism. It's done the worst. Like anthropology, I believe, is to blame for so much of the injustice that Black people have faced all over the world, starting from the 1400s. But what it did is, because I had to trace that intellectual history of just how this discipline began in the 1400s and how we find ourselves where we are in 2021, where so much, like for instance, anthropology had started having a presence on the continent in 1921 in Cape Town, right? I believe at Stellenbosch, if I'm not mistaken, or it could have been UCT. However, at Wits, it was established in 2023. So it's been there for 98 years, right? And in all of that time, the very reason to have anthropologists from Britain come to South Africa and train anthropologists here is because of the native question, the segregationist government before the National Party in 1948, and also the National Party, which established apartheid, they just wanted to understand Black people. They wanted to understand how we speak, how we think, how we marry, how we celebrate, how we mourn, how we sleep, how we wake up. They wanted to understand every aspect of our being in order to be able to conquer us, to govern us. And they needed to do that. They needed anthropologists. They needed the science, the study, the intellectual discipline of anthropology to be able to do that. And so that is the tradition in which I find myself working in, where I realized that anthropology literally started with stories. It literally started with people saying, we sailed to that faraway land and we saw these people and they looked like this and they were so different to us. And so it literally started with people telling stories. And that's why I have such a very big and deep respect for stories.
Yeah.
Because how you craft your stories today has an influence on how the people of the future see themselves, understand themselves, and really live and move and be. So, yeah.
Okay, so... wow, first of all, what a lesson. Wow. Okay. But for our audience listening in who don't understand what anthropology actually is, can you just break that down for us?
Okay, sure. So anthropology is the study of human cultures, of people. How it began is with sailors, travelers, missionaries in European countries who in the 1400s were starting to travel away from their own homes and quote unquote, discovering new lands, right? Discovering new people, coming back home and telling stories that this is what we saw, this is how they live, this is how they eat. And as that happens, this is when Europeans are realizing that, hang on, so we're not in this planet by ourselves. Like, we always knew that the Asians were there.
Yeah.
And we know that the Mediterraneans and the Egyptians are down there, but there's more.
There's more.
Who are these people? And, you know, they tell stories. They don't dress. They live in the jungles. They're this, they're that. And so that's when these Europeans start to tell themselves that, oh, that means we must be at the apex of humanity. We must be at the top then, because if these people are living like this and we're not living like that, that means we must definitely be superior. But that also means that we have lots to learn from these people. Maybe they can teach us how to live as one with nature. Maybe they can teach us how to be innocent. All of these very terribly paternalistic phrases for indigenous peoples around the world. But that's when they decided to make it a discipline, right? And so that's how it began. But nowadays, when you go into university, what really it's about, it's just about understanding culture, period, right? So you have various kinds of anthropologies. You've got economic anthropology, food anthropology, medical anthropology, political anthropology, legal anthropology, all kinds of anthropology. So for anything in the world, we as anthropologists are interested in, how did this begin? How did it come for people to come together and form community around this thing, right? So hip hop, right? How have people decided to form community around hip hop? What is the history of hip hop? How do people speak? How do people dress? Do they eat? You know, what do they eat? Dream Hampton argues that hip hop is not a culture. And she says in order for something to be a culture, you have to be able to ascribe a certain food to it. It's still in contention, but, you know, the people speak of a hip hop culture and people speak of a Kwaito culture. And, you know, you look at something like, what is it? I forgot the phrase right now, but you look at people who do home births and doulas and midwives, and people then would be interested in the practices of home birth and what is it that we can learn from our ancestors that we can bring. So anthropologists are very helpful because they help to put that knowledge into books. And while I really despise how South African anthropology formed, there are anthropologists that you could look back at if you don't know too much about your Setswana culture. And you can find these books that they've written where they've written that these are the practices, this is why they do it, this is how they do it. That belongs in books because of anthropologists. So it's a double-edged sword. But
we need it documented, we need to understand our history.
Exactly.
But at the same time, like you said,
it was at a terrible price. It was incredibly violent and imperialistic. So as an anthropologist today, how I think I'm able to sleep at night knowing that I'm existing in this discipline is that there are so many stories that have been told about Black people that are terribly incorrect. And there's so many stories about Black women especially that have been told that are quite awful, really. And I'm here to do what I can to tell the story so that if everyone, for instance, my master's project was about, you know, these women that people call blessees. So if everyone is going to say these terrible things about these Black women because they make particular choices, I'm there to speak to those Black women, hear what their decisions are, and to just perhaps cast a different light on it. So that's just a little bit of what I do.
Wow, that is so fascinating. And I mean, props to you for being and existing in this space.
Thank you.
It does not sound easy.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah, it doesn't sound, it's not easy at all because, you know, you're working against decades and decades and decades and decades of a particular kind of narrative.
Yes, exactly.
And so when you insert yourself, you firstly have to reference the narrative because working in citational practice means you have to constantly acknowledge that you're not the first to think about it. So you have to pull on all of the racism and all the stereotype. You have to acknowledge it and then only carve a new path. But I suppose it's the nature of what I do.
Sure. Okay. And on top of being an anthropologist, you also a writer. You write books, story books. Tell us about how you got into that, how that happened.
So that is my favorite thing in the world, because I was busy with my master's project, I believe in 2017, and it's really hard, because you are trying your best to read as much as possible and write as much as possible, and in between the two to have some original thoughts, and to be an original anthropologist if you can. And so I was not feeling my work at all. And I remember I just wanted a break. I wanted a break from anthropology, but I wanted to give my mind a break. And so I started reading children's books because those have always brought me joy. So I started reading children's books, discovering new writers, and it was just such a fantastic period for me. And this was me procrastinating, really. And I thought, okay, how about I try to write a book like this, And I was telling myself that, like, no, I'm not going to do this because, first of all, I don't have children. How dare I? And then as time went on, I was like, okay, maybe I can try. And I recall really around that time when I'm thinking about children's books, I meet up with Kay Bapela, and Katu. So he basically says to me that they are launching this really cool project because they're part of an agency called the Book of Swag. And they're like, we're launching this really cool campaign, and it's with this bank, and they just want to dare people to do that thing that they've always wanted to do, but they just were too afraid and they kept putting off. And I'm like, I wonder what thing that is for me. And easily it was like, the book. Okay, fine, the book. So I got to be, I suppose, an influencer for the campaign for a little bit, and they gave us all a little bit of money just to get us started. So people did different things. One person had never been to Robben Island, and it was a dream of theirs to go, so they went. Some of them had grown up in a home, and so they decided to redecorate that home. People did different things. People threw parties, people did fashion shows, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna try and write this book. So I managed to find an illustrator, Masango Morulane, who I love working with, and her and I, over WhatsApp and email, put this book together in like 2 weeks. But I didn't have the time to actually publish it into a book, so I just blew up the illustrations and I put them on A1 board, and I went to a bookstore called Bridge Books Josie, and they hosted me, and I read for children, and it was just really a fun experience. And as soon as the campaign was wrapped up, I realized that actually this story is not so bad. Like, I could make it an actual
there's
book.
something here.
There's definitely something here.
Yeah.
And so that's when my journey really, really started, because I stayed up, between me and Google and my master's thesis. I researched everything I could about, what does it take to publish? Because I wanted to publish myself as well. So I researched so much. I looked around. I realized that in South Africa, I wanted to publish, with a publisher, because that would have been the easiest thing to do. But I realized that not a lot of our publishers publish children's books, and those who do weren't open for submissions. And I was like, am I really going to wait until next July, or is this passion burning inside me now? So that's why I decided to do it myself. And in the end, I did it. I put it together. I published it. I went onto social media to let people know about it, and they received it so warmly, which I'm so grateful for. And people really started to support the book, and that's where it started with Mpumi's Magic Beads.
And now you're an award-winning writer, just like that.
Yeah,
you just from a day.
You're right? And that's the thing. Like, it's so interesting that sometimes you need to hear someone say, go make that dream possible. It is possible. Just do it. Like, don't even think of anything else. Just put your mind to it and do it. And it was a great thing.
Wow. And because you've written so much more since then. What's the process of writing a book like? Well, for you, like mentally, I can't imagine writing a book. So what is that like?
Yeah, it's interesting because now I've had some experience with also, I haven't written a full-length book for adults yet, although that's on the way. But it's such an interesting process for me because I'm a poet as well, right?
Yes.
So I know how to write creatively, but poems are so short compared to books. But one thing I knew going to school and learning in English about books and reading books and all of that, you know that a story must have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yes.
You know that it needs to have a conflict and a resolution. You know that you need to have round characters and flat characters. So with that knowledge that, thank goodness, the Gauteng Department of Education had given me over a period of 12 years, I was able to kind of cobble something together. My process now is a bit different from when I first started, in that my process, it's so interesting, and I don't want to be too esoteric, but it really just comes to me, you know, like I make sure that I exercise every day in the morning. Like I either run or walk, and that's when I just allow my mind to do what it needs to do. So I took a walk this morning, for instance, and halfway through my walk, what was I thinking about? I was thinking about food, you know, and I was thinking about my publisher. She sent me an article on food, and I'm like, I'm going to write a story about food. And just as I'm writing and I'm looking at my neighbors' houses, I'm like, yeah, okay, so this is what happens, and this happens, and this happens. So I wrote the whole story in my brain. I've plotted the whole story. I just need to find a time to sit down and write it. And that's really how stories come to me. I take my walks, I think about things, and then they come to me. Or sometimes I say, I'd really love to write a story about this, and I set my intention, and I go to bed, and I dream about the story. And I wake up and I write it down. So that's a little bit esoteric. It doesn't work for everybody. But what happens is that I think as an artist, as a writer, you have to feed your craft, you know? So I read a lot. I read lots of children's books. I read lots of anthropology books, because if you're going to master your craft, you need to understand that you're not working in isolation. You're not the first. You're not the last. You are working in a tradition of very incredible people, and you are supposed to pay homage to not only yourself, God, and your ancestors when you do your work, but you also pay homage to the greats who have come before you, and you do that by respecting their work, you know. So I read a lot. When the theaters open, I go to the theater. When there are dance productions, I go watch. Live music, I love it. I listen to lots of jazz. Just incredible artists, no matter what medium they work in, they get respect from me, you know. And that's my writing practice, by feeding my spirit, feeding my mind, keeping up with my fitness and keeping my mind and body healthy, and just having a lot of time to myself, so that I can listen to myself and listen to the stories that come up, and be able to see a house and make that a story, you know. That's what I do.
It sounds magical. I'm thinking of the word magic because obviously one of your books says...
I love magic. Yeah, and I do think it's magical. It sounds
magical, right?
I love magic.
Okay, and I mean, as someone who's talking so much about, like you mentioned books a lot, what books would you recommend for let's pick a scenario, like for a young Black woman in South Africa that's growing up trying to find her way? What books would you suggest?
I think the book I would suggest is the book that really actually put me on this path, which is The Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes.
You know, okay, look, I was literally asking, and as I was asking, I'm like, I'm that girl. So let's see what you're going to give me.
So you've read it, I'm sure.
I read that book. I love that book.
Don't you love it?
I absolutely loved it.
I love that book so much. And I honestly credit that book with changing the path of my life. Like, it honestly changed how I think about myself in the world and what I'm trying to do. Because there's a lot of fear that comes with trying to exist, regardless of whether you're in corporate or you're an artist or an entrepreneur, whatever it is you're doing, there's so much fear because you know how deeply you feel about this. You know what you've got to give, but you know that you don't exist in isolation. So will these opportunities come? Will the funding come? Will people pick up your application and give you the job? There's just so much uncertainty. And what I love about that book is she lays it bare. She's a person, you know, she tells us about herself as a person, and no matter how successful she was, even at the point where she wrote the book, she was still feeling fear, she was still feeling anxiety, and so she had to just get herself into a practice. She had to discipline herself in saying yes, because it's easier to say no, it's easier to make excuses, right? And even where she talks about there is a part where she says, you know, she had to say yes by also saying no to herself. That was like so incredible for me, because it's like, you know, I don't want to wake up. I want to stay in bed until 12, you know. Sometimes that's what I want to do. But it's like, no, you have to say no to yourself. You have to have a routine. You have to be disciplined. You have to eat well. You have to be mindful of what you're putting in your body. You have to be mindful of what you're putting in your spirit. And so I really do recommend that book, because it really put me on a different path below. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I was just floating about. But what that book gave me was intention and discipline. You know, it gave me intention and discipline. And then I have a really amazing friend, Noklinda Mkize, who's always talking about, how to, you know, be my best self and to not fall into the pitfalls of dating in Johannesburg, because that also wastes lots of young women's time, I believe. You know, so just say no to nice things sometimes, so you can say yes to yourself, because ultimately you are the nicest thing, and your life is the nicest thing. And you know, sometimes you have to be alone for a very long time in order to craft that life, you know.
I'm thinking about how you mentioned in the beginning that you always wanted to feel special, and it's funny because that feeling of specialness we often get from others.
Yes.
But now, as you say, you know, spending time with yourself, be with yourself, you need to make yourself feel special. And like saying yes to yourself by saying no to certain things is one of those ways of, be special. Like,
yes,
you are special. You don't need it from external factors.
Exactly. Toni Morrison says, you are your best thing. And I really believe in that with my full self. You really are your best thing. And external validation, I mean, we all need it. There's no way to exist without it. But you have to be so selective about where it's coming from and whether that person means well for you. Because validation coming from a heart that is not pure, really, you could do without it.
Honestly.
You know?
Okay, so I want you now to take us through what have been the highlights of your journey, but also the lowlights.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so the highlights of my journey were definitely completing my master's degree, because I just took so long to do it, because I decided to become an author in the middle of it. So that was such a highlight. Just getting my book out there. And for me, I love celebrating everything. So the first day my book got into exclusive books, the first day it got into CNA, the first day it got into Love Books. So every single thing has been quite monumental for me. But of course, the first time it won a prize, and the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time it won a prize.
Oh,
and that was fantastic. Being able to work, I got a call from Dr. Judy Dlamini, and she was like, you know, let's write a book. And I was like, okay. And 3 weeks later, she was capping me at my graduation, because she's my school's chancellor. So, I mean, the magic in that. Also working with Professor Claudine Storbeck and creating a book that also addresses deaf children as well. What else? I'm working on books like all the time, so those are highlights as well. And I did a thing. Oh, being on the cover of The Throne, like what?
Yes.
that was so cool, because writers are not cover stars in South Africa.
Yes,
writers are
that's a
not
good
cover
point,
stars
actually.
in South Africa. So to be working in this discipline and to be working in the work I do, and to also get to be on the cover of a magazine.
I mean, you're being celebrated. That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's amazing. To be shot by Austin Malema. I mean,
I saw that picture. That picture was like,
he's so incredible. So that was just an amazing experience working with Karen as well.
I hope you have that cover like framed somewhere up in your space.
I am going to blow it up, and there's so many beautiful photos, and I'm definitely going to put them up. So that was fantastic. And also collaborating with MultiChoice on 10,000 Stories, and having them, you know, be so proud of that project, and I'm proud of that project too. Having that project win 2 awards at the Promax Africa Awards, that's also fantastic. And to just, you know, so my highlights are really just knowing that I've carved a space where if you need a poet, you know, you might call me. And if you need a children's book writer, you might call me. I'm still working on, if you need an anthropologist, you call me. I'm still working on that one with my PhD. But it just feels incredibly special. And I keep going back to being special because, you know, Pelo, my belief is that with everything that our ancestors have been through in this country, it really matters that we are here and we are part of this bloodline and we are part of where we came from. And our bloodlines didn't die because we're here, you know, and for them to have gone through the difficulties that they did and for us to be here being the first in our families is incredibly monumental. And so it's not that I want to be special in the context of everybody else. I feel special already just coming from the parents that I come from and coming from the home that I come from and having overcome the challenges I have. But also I want to be able to do something with my life that when I'm gone and you pick up my book in a library, it can make you feel something. I just want to move you, and I want to move children especially, you know. So for me, just working and doing this work and knowing that every time I work, I'm using my voice, my opinion, my lessons, you know, I don't get briefs, you know, like people are like, can you write about this? And I'm like, let me see. And I try and they like it and we move forward. But it feels good to not have to take direction from anyone else, you know, and for my voice to be the thing. It feels really amazing. Now the lowlights, it comes with loneliness, this life that I've crafted for myself, because if you're going to spend a long time reading and writing, and not just reading and writing, but reading to deeply understand and to make contributions as you write, you have to be alone to do that work, you know? And you have to deny yourself a lot of nice things, you know? I mean, Corona sucks, but in terms of the lockdown, like, this is my life. I've been doing this. I've been going nowhere. So I mean, but you know, and I grew up especially in university with social friends, you know, people who throw parties, people who are DJs. And yes, I experienced that life. It was wonderful. I've gone to all the parties I could go to, but ultimately, like, knowing that that's not my path. My path is here by myself with these books. It's lonely, you know. But it's just a general low light because we need people. But in terms of like concrete low lights, I recall when I first published this book and I got into a bookstore called, I won't even say their name because I'm trying to not think about them anymore, but this bookstore was supposed to be the dream for so many Black writers and so many Black readers because they had curated their offering to be cognizant of how difficult it is to be a Black writer in South Africa, and they were going to do what they can as a bookstore to try and address those inequalities by opening up also to self-published writers, because as a self-published writer, it's immensely difficult to get your book into stores, you know. So there I was, self-published, and I'd written this book that I believed in so immensely, and they believed in too, and so they stocked it, and it was doing so well, and it was doing so great. And also with my own mistakes that I definitely am cognizant of, they completely took advantage of me and many other people as well. And just like that, they just were no longer at that address. They had not paid people's money. So effectively, they had stolen our books because they had not paid for them. And, you know, self-publishing is tough because every piece of paper, you know, every color on the page, you've paid for every single thing. And it's so much more difficult if you're like trying to have a quality product. And these people just completely took advantage of that after gesturing as though their politics were not that way. Their politics were, pro-African and pro-Black people, but their practices absolutely weren't. So that sucked so much, you know, and I couldn't understand why they would do this to me. And eventually I learned to let it go. So that was a low light. But what it did teach me is that I don't want to be self-published. What it did teach me is I don't want to have a business. Those are not my dreams for myself. My dream for myself is to write and to write well.
Yeah.
And business is not me, because what I realized is that there's no time to write when you're busy trying to figure out the admin, the legal stuff, the finances, the taxes. I was like, I don't even like doing my own taxes, and now I have to figure out the taxes for this company. So it just was killing my passion. I just want to write, and other people will do what they're good at. You know, I want to do what I'm good at. So I think I'm grateful because it was at the time that mistake was it was a mistake, but it was also a crime, really, and it was huge, it was such a huge disappointment in my life. But when I look back at it now, it was quite small in terms of the lesson was huge, but what was done to me was small. The monies was small. When I look at it, the monies was small and whatever, because it's like I didn't even want to keep pursuing it legally, because I'm like, but these people, what they've done to themselves will follow them for a very long time. But as for me, my blessings continue, and it's okay. So yeah, that was definitely a low light. Yeah, I can't think of any other lowlights really, because like I told you, I celebrate every small thing. So even if I mean, I haven't yet been nominated for something that I have not won, although those days will come, right? And for me, even being nominated is great. Even being counted amongst the greats is enough for me. So yeah, there aren't many lowlights. I'm just very happy to do what I do.
Oh wow, I love that. I can see like the smile on your face, and it's getting even me excited. Do you have any tips for like any young South Africans that are trying to get into the publishing or maybe into writing specifically? Do you have any tips for them?
Sure. I think what will always be evergreen advice is that if you want to be a writer, you should firstly know why you want to write. And if maybe that is too big of a question for the moment, then you should just respect your craft. Just always start there. And by respecting your craft, it means you read, you understand the rules of language, and even though you would like to break them and to decolonize the way of writing, but also understand why and how you're doing it. It's important to write quite a lot. Write a lot. You don't have to always be writing for an audience. Write for yourself. But also, I think what I love about my particular journey is understanding that social media has been so instrumental to it. And I think that people should really use that to their advantage. And they should really put their work out there, but not in a way that is pestering people to engage with your work, but just find a space on the internet, carve your space on it, exist in it, put your writing there. When relevant, send it out to the necessary people, but just believe in yourself every single day. Believe in your work. Have a writing practice, be disciplined for yourself, and of course have your goals and reach out and try to make them possible. But definitely read and respect your craft will always be number one.
Definitely. Okay, so now we're at my favorite part of the podcast where I get to ask my favorite question. This question comes from my favorite quote, which says, "Be who you needed when you were younger." That's my favorite quote.
I love that.
I'm actually just related-ish. I'm just thinking of like, when you were speaking, or when you're saying how you just want someone to be able to pick up a book of yours and feel something. I was actually picturing, like, you tell the story of how it was in grade 1 when you got access to that library. I just started visualizing that you walking into that library and finding one of your books. Like, that would have been amazing. But anyway, sorry, that was just something I was thinking of while you were speaking. But okay, so be who you knew when you were younger, because I believe that even if you can't go back and change time, if you needed something, or if you need to hear something or see someone when you were younger, there's somebody who needs that today.
Yes.
So if you could go back and talk to younger Lebohang, and now this could be you at any age, it could be you last year, it could be you 10, 20 years ago, what would you say to her?
Wow. First of all, I really love that quote. That is incredibly powerful. I think I would probably go back to my very young self who was dealing with my parents' divorce, and just trying to, figure out what that means to be with parents who didn't want to be together anymore, and did they want to be with me? What does that mean for myself? And really just to let her know that you are loved, you are one of a kind, and you are going to make such a big impact one day. But most of all, you're loved, you know, and you're special and you are magic. I think that would have been fantastic. But also I kind of got those messages from all the books that I was reading, you know, because books have a way of being a friend and of being a comfort. And I want my books to be that for little girls in South Africa, because they were amazing, but also I couldn't always relate to the stories. I couldn't always relate to the characters, but that's the magic of stories. You don't always have to necessarily see yourself, but I can only imagine how amazing it is to be a child in South Africa right now, right? And it's not just me writing. It's Sihle Njokweni, it's Refilwe Mwahludi who's writing. It's so many young Black women and young Black illustrators who are writing and creating stories. And so, yes, they'll always have the classics and the Roald Dahls and the Harry Potters and the Pippi Longstockings. But you look around and there's like Wanda and Bumi's Magic Beads, and Zuleika Patel just released a book, you know what I mean? So you look around and it's like, if our confidence now, you know, we had the books we had the experiences we had, our confidence is okay, but we're doing fine. But can you imagine like children who are young now, how more unstoppable they're gonna be? And just to know that I'm contributing just a little bit, like my book can be a friend or a hug for a child who is gonna sit in a corner and read by themselves. Oh my God, that's all I needed to do. That's enough for me.
Oh wow, I love that. You are special, you are loved.
Yeah,
I absolutely love that. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. This has been amazing. How can our audience follow your journey or get in touch with you?
Okay, I have my little blog that I keep up. It's lebohangmasango.com. And then on Twitter, it's Lebohang Writes, which is one word. And then on Instagram, where I'm never there, but it's Instagram. It's Lebohang Masango. So those are the places where I can usually be.
You're on Instagram. I was watching your video of when you got the Promax Award. The trophy. Oh, it was so beautiful and so genuine. I loved it so much.
I was like in my sweats doing my work, and then this delivery comes, and I'm like, oh my God, it was so incredible. And look, because the thing is that
authentic, like you just.
Yeah, it was, and I remember like feeling afterwards like, oh my God, I didn't even put makeup on. But I was just like, you know what, this is my life. Like I sit here in sweatpants all day and I write all day. And then, you know, sometimes trophies get delivered to my house, which is nice. But like the truth of who I am is in these sweatpants. And I don't mind showing that to the world, really. Yeah.
No, I love that. I love that video. I've loved this. Oh my gosh.
I've loved talking to you. Yeah, this has been wonderful. And I love that you, like I said in the beginning, but it's really important to have platforms like this, you know, because the lie that keeps being repeated is that there were no women doing this. There were no Black women doing this. And so to document and to archive ourselves is so important because, you know, I know that what's her name? The one who is she works with ships. She was on the podcast as well. Londi, yes. Londi. You know, you have Londi over here. You've got Karen and Tembiso, and you've got all of the amazing women who are also coming from a line of amazing women. Yes. And so what you're doing is that you're just making the circle bigger, the circle of influence, these stories, and you're amplifying them. So thank you so much for this platform.
Thank you so much for listening to She Brigade. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend you think will enjoy it too. You can also share it on your social media and tag us at She Brigade. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter using the link in the show notes. We'd also love to hear your feedback, so feel free to email your questions or your suggestions to info@shebrigade.com or DM us on Instagram or Twitter at She Brigade. Until next time, bye.